Seward's Folly. It's something you'll find in any U.S. history textbook. The belief that the United States' purchase of Alaska from Russia was considered a huge mistake at the time, with the U.S. paying $7.2 million, or the equivalent of over $150 million today, for a whole lot of empty nothingness. It seemed like a folly on a monumental scale. That is until Alaska was found to be a natural wonderland teeming with natural resources. But if no one knew how valuable Alaska would be, why did the United States purchase it for such a high price? And did people at the time really think it was such a colossal blunder? Today we're looking at the real reason why the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia. It's hard to imagine the United States today without Alaska as its ultimate, often deadly frontier. At 665,384 square miles, 1,723,337 square kilometers, in size, Alaska is by far the biggest state in the country, making up 16% of all land area in the U.S. The next three biggest states combined, Texas, California, and Montana, are still smaller than it. Its 732,000 residents also make it the third least populous state, with only Wyoming and Vermont having fewer people. It's not only the westernmost state, it's also technically the easternmost. As the Aleutian Archipelago extends so far west, it actually reaches into the eastern hemisphere. And yes, there is even a place you can see Russia from your backyard on a clear day, if you live in a very particular area along the Bering Strait, that is. Since its colonization by Russia in the 1740s, Alaska has been a tantalizing frontier for fortune seekers. Its history is marked by a series of booms and crazes as outsiders rushed in to take advantage of the state's natural resources, and many really did strike it rich by taking its gold, its furs, and, more recently, its oil. But it's also home to indigenous cultures who have been adapting to this way of life for thousands of years. Indigenous groups became experts at navigating this forbidding landscape via snowshoes, dog sleds, kayaks, and canoes, and could thrive in harsh conditions. Today, 15% of Alaska's population identifies as indigenous, the most of any U.S. state. Alaska faces Russia across the Bering Strait, with only 55 miles separating the two at the narrowest point. It is largely believed that during the last ice age, Alaska and Eurasia were connected by land, what's called the Bering Land Bridge, or sometimes Beringia. This land bridge served as an entry point for groups of ancient hunter-gatherers to cross over to the Americas and populate the empty land. They would spread far and wide, with some moving south and becoming the ancestors of American Indians. During the last ice age, so much of Earth's water was frozen into glaciers that sea levels dropped worldwide by as much as 300 feet, 91 meters, exposing land that now lies underwater and connecting places that are separated today. Australia was connected to New Guinea, while Britain and Ireland were connected to mainland Europe via an area known as Doggerland, and parts of Indonesia were connected to mainland Asia. This last ice age lasted from 125,000 to only 14,000 years ago, which is actually a huge chunk of the total time Homo sapiens have even been on the Earth. The ice sheets reached their greatest extent, and sea levels reached their lowest point, during a period called the last glacial maximum, about 30,000 years ago. Then about 15,000 years ago, the Earth started warming up again. Glaciers began melting, sea levels rose, and the Bering Land Bridge went totally underwater about 10,000 years ago. So what was Beringia like? Well, warmer and wetter than you might think, considering this is Alaska. In an ice age, it was a refuge for animals like the woolly rhino and the North American camel. Its plant and animal life were more like Eurasia than North America because it was cut off from North America by the massive Laurentide ice sheet. Scientists believe it wasn't until about 20,000 years ago that a corridor opened in the Laurentide ice sheet, allowing people to migrate into the rest of the Americas. However, these numbers are constantly changing as new archaeological remains are found. Alaska was first colonized by Russians beginning in the 18th century. But it had been a long trip from Moscow to Asia's Pacific coast in the first place. Russian expansion into Asia began in earnest in the 1600s. These early Russian explorers, called promyshleniki, meaning your orphan, were merchants and fur trappers who helped Russia expand eastward across Eurasia, seeking pelts, particularly sable, they could sell in Europe and China. As these Russians met the nomadic people of Central Asia and Siberia, they would sometimes trade with them for furs, but often they would simply demand tribute or take hostages, demanding furs and pel.